Kunal is the medical director of IHEAD. He's the program lead on our Master of Public Health, and the Master of Public Health and Master of Clinical Research are two of the 5 programs that we offer with the University of Warwick. So the format for this evening is going to be a talk between Jennifer and Kunal on navigating the clinical research ecosystem, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. So please do keep the questions coming throughout. Your participation is really, really valuable. So with that, I will drop away and hand you over to the stars of the evening. Thanks so much, everyone.
Well, thank you, Jim, for that. Before we continue, what I'd like to say is that, as Jim said, this is very much a nice, formal fireside chat between myself and Jennifer. And what we want is, you're going to hear nuggets of information coming out from someone who's clearly an influencer and clearly a leader in the space of clinical research. If I was just to touch on a little bit of what Jennifer's done, she has founded Javara, and by all means, have a look at what they do, javararesearch.com, in terms of revolutionizing the industry and access to trials. And that's really, really important. But we actually met when she was talking about her work that she's also done with Greater Gift, a nonprofit that focuses on access to healthcare throughout the United States. She was recently, recognized as one of the top female leaders in clinical research with PM360 Elite, and has been a woman of influence noted by organizations such as Pharma Voice. It's a real pleasure to have her here today. And Jennifer, if I may, we like to always use this phrase whenever we meet people in Ireland. What's the story? What's your story, I suppose? If I was to say, what's brought you to where you are today compared to 20 years ago? I think that's a fascinating journey, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, Kunal, thank you. And thank you to everybody, to all the participants, for giving some time to lean in and learn a little bit more. Certainly any opportunity I have to share some of my learnings and hopefully pique some curiosity around clinical research is always greatly appreciated. So I guess to answer your question, Kunal, I think for me, and this has been what originally drew me to clinical trials and what has kept me now, what I would describe to be on a journey that started in clinical research, to be almost more an awakening along the way of the opportunity to contribute really to public health in a much broader sense. But I think it is that, notion around, doing something professionally that's meaningful and that does, in fact, kind of change the lives of people and promote well-being. And, that's what clinical research has done for me. And I think what I love about it, and I suspect of the audience, I would suspect that we are all kind of like-minded people. And whatever has brought us to this moment to be here together, the common denominator, again, is, how can we collectively actually, help improve global health in one way or another, whether it's one patient at a time, whether it's one policy at a time, whether it's, one new innovation at a time. But I think that, kind of at the core of it, that's what I'm here, and that's what I'm really all about.
Well, that's fantastic. And, the journey is never easy for anyone to certainly, and we all recognize that, to start your own company, found it, and become the CEO of a very influential clinical research group. If I was to say, look, you graduated from A&M a while back, what have you seen as the challenges from that point onwards up till now? And then what I want to expand on in terms of that question is the challenges we're now facing. And I'll certainly highlight a few for the audience as well as, and Jennifer, I'm sure will as well. But I think what's really important for our audience is understanding what you've also experienced as an individual from the moment you graduated, because we have a lot of students, as you can imagine, and all of you out there who are currently on our programs or wish to be on our programs, you will hopefully see some of these challenges as well and understand how to tackle them. And I think, Jennifer, your insight around that would be very valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a, challenge standpoint, well, first of all, let me say this, and especially to the students, make no mistake. I mean, there was never in my 30 plus years ago from the beginning. It's not that I ever had a vision at that moment in time that I eventually was going to start a new company, lead a company, and in some cases, maybe even lead a movement around the intersection of research and healthcare. That wasn't it at all. So along the way, it truly has been a journey, and kind of, one path has come to maybe, kind of an intersection point that kind of has led to another door. And, I think about my journey as many doors opening, and the generosity of many, many people having opened some of those doors. So, the journey, you're never by yourself. And I want to be very clear, my journey has been one that has been incredibly enriched by mentors, people who I have, admired from afar, problems to be solved. But as I reflect on the journey, Kunal, I think, it is one of complexity. When I think about, entering clinical research, just coming out of college or university, many years ago, first of all, I was bewildered because I entered into a career for which I had never prepared for. I knew that I was drawn to healthcare. I knew that I was drawn to something where I would have, the ability to serve people. But the actual sector around clinical research was not anything that I was aware of. There certainly weren't courses, such as IHEED right now. I mean, what an advantage that people have today in a way, kind of back at the beginning of my journey. There weren't programs like this that even exposed you. So, kind of falling into a sector and then very quickly understanding, just that complexity. And, you're dealing with, the whole focus on this is the ecosystem. The ecosystem around clinical research is extraordinarily complex. I mean, you are dealing with, a multitude of innovative companies. I think right now it's estimated globally there are 8,000 companies that are pursuing new medical advancement. So you've got complexity in terms of just the size and types of companies on really the pharma, or the biotech side of the equation. We don't answer any of the scientific questions without patient participants. And then if you think about the patient base, every disease, every specific, type of, patient population, there are a multitude of phenotypes, people who are facing, debilitating chronic disease, people who have rare disease where ostensibly there is no treatment access. You are dealing with people whose everyday life is impacted by more acute, but nonetheless affected, in quality of life. So you've got the complexity in terms of the patient and all of us as healthcare consumers and what are our specific needs. And then you have, all the multitude of additional providers, that kind of fit into that ecosystem. And everybody has their place, whether you are drawn from a regulatory standpoint, or even an ethical review board, you're drawn towards, the human ethics component to it. So there are just so many different players. And I think that, the complexity comes down to how well do you subscribe to being a team player? Because we all have very unique, make no mistake, I'm not a sports enthusiast. So I can talk like this much about soccer or basketball, but I do know that, from a team standpoint, you have very specific roles and responsibilities on that team. And I think it's really kind of like understanding where and how you fit into that overarching team. And that has not changed. And in fact, I think over the years and now with technology advancement, that complexity is even getting greater.
Of course. And I think what you've touched on there, it certainly from a public health standpoint, in terms of antimicrobial resistance, rare diseases, current improvements on drug treatments, they're just the tip of the iceberg in terms of some of the challenges that we face as health workers. But what's interesting is that, and we've talked about it before, is that when you think about that team model and the complexity within that team model, you've highlighted before, Jennifer, that there are still obviously workflow and leadership issues within that model, and obviously there's still issues around affluence and diversity. What has your experience been around, the workflow and leadership issues in that research space, and have you been able to successfully overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a leadership standpoint, it is getting alignment around what defines success. And so, in my experience, there's been some divide within the ecosystem in terms of how we are approaching, for example, unlocking some of the challenges and difficulties that we have in patient enrollment. And so, there are a lot of complexities that go to that. I mean, just basic public awareness of clinical trials. Now, certainly since the pandemic has happened, that has helped, I think, general public knowledge around, awareness of clinical trials. But then the access piece of this is still, it's estimated, and from a US standpoint, and I think actually the US statistics are probably even a little better than rest of the world. I mean, on average, over a lifetime, fewer than 1 in 200 people will ever participate in a clinical trial. Whereas I'm sure the numbers are far greater than that of people who might actually benefit over the course of their lifetime in participating in research. So this access, is one piece of it. I will say that I think if we were to pivot our thinking less around clinical trials, and clinical trials, the narrative that clinical trials are a necessary activity for pharmaceutical companies to gain regulatory approval, in whatever country. And if instead we thought about clinical research almost as innovative healthcare. And so from a leadership standpoint, right, that starts to drive some different, I think, ways of thinking, partnerships that you are structuring, less about a hospital working with pharma companies to, collect data, to answer questions, to gain regulatory approval, and more about what are the unmet needs of the patient population for whom we serve. And then how are we building partnerships? How are we leveraging technology? How are we defining success in terms of using innovative healthcare, emerging innovative healthcare options to address the real-time needs of our patients? So we're actually doing research for participants as opposed to doing research with research participants. And I think Kunal, I think it's just kind of a shift in orientation that really actually takes you less pharma and ecosystem centered and more truly kind of patient and population, perhaps even population health centered.
No, and I think those aims are amazing, and people like yourself and others are certainly delivering around all of that. But I think what you and I have touched on in the past is that even with all of that, we've got professionals in the audience here. We've got people who are going to emerge as professionals after their training. How do those professionals then intersect? How do they get together, as it were, and collaborate? Because we are talking about, just touching on what you just said there, public health officials, people in clinical trial leadership, people in various leadership roles in clinical research. And I think one thing, just to expand on, and we haven't elaborated, is that everyone's under the assumption that, people involved in clinical research are just the executives and the principal investigators. The majority of the workforce are statisticians, salespeople, clinical research associates, you name it, there are a plethora of roles there, and they all fit into those different professional fields. So then how do they collaborate and intersect? I mean, what is the answer? Is there one answer, or do you have any examples from your own experience yourself?
Well, I will say, I will share this, lessons to my younger self. I will tell you on my own career journey, I had the benefit of having a mentor literally my first month on the job. And I started out, I think, very much with an orientation around what my job description. I was trying to learn the job. I was trying to kind of understand the ecosystem, and I was trying to fulfill my job. So it was very much kind of me centered. It was about my job, what I needed to be doing for my job, what my responsibilities were. And about a month into, my journey, I started as research coordinator, again, right out of university. But about a month into that journey, this mentor, kind of took me aside. Maybe I was even complaining a little bit, these things that were being asked of me, were they really within my job description? The ecosystem was broad. Why did I need to be that interested in what everybody else was doing? And it was honestly, I think it was one of the greatest gifts that anybody's ever given to me. And this person said, you know what, you have an unbelievable opportunity at this moment to be really curious and absorb these interactions like a sponge. I mean, that literally was that was the term that this person used, and I took that to heart. I really did take that to heart. So I think, to that point, Kunal, what I would offer up, I started out keeping my head down kind of in my organization, my job. And in a pretty short period of time, I just became a lot more curious. I really did. Anybody that I interacted with, if I was interacting with somebody from a pharmaceutical company and trying to understand where that particular that individual, where they sat in that organization, and what is it that their role, their job, their orientation was there to solve, and starting to, help kind of connect those dots. So I would offer up for the students and for this audience, I would offer that same advice. And I think you're already so far ahead of me. The fact that you're participating in this is a great example. And I think it is taking advantage of any learning opportunity that you possibly can. You may not ever believe that that the career ahead for you is as a statistician, but I promise you, within the ecosystem, just understanding the principles around why that is so important will help drive some of your other, behaviors. Because again, like I said, we're all here at the end of the day, kind of as one high functioning team, and team members understanding, I think the respective roles. So, participating in educational programs, networking. Kunal and I met at a meeting out in California, and not just going to a meeting, not just going into a workshop, but really embracing, every single opportunity to be that kind of lifelong learner. I think is what has been very defining for me. And 35 years into this, I only realize I have barely scratched the surface still in my learning journey.
I know, and I think that's really impressive. I think what you've touched on is that if we were to break it down, it does come down to communication, access, and collaboration. I think as a practicing physician and working in public health and international development, is that has worked very well for many of us, but there's still a huge number of people out there where even getting through the door where that opportunity arises is difficult. If we think about the diversity and affluence issues, that challenges that we face every day, if I think about in our settings where we're trying to expand clinical research to geographies that where it's not traditionally been, what have you seen in terms of trying to address those specific challenges? I remember you telling me about internships and mentorship programs, because what we do know for a fact from the evidence that we see is that you know, we know for a fact, you touched on the fact that the data in the US is very, very good, and it is because of what it's been exploring. If I was to say to the audience, we now know for a fact that when there is people from certain ethnic backgrounds, if there is a mistrust with government and local institutions, that mistrust naturally carries over to clinical research organizations and to public health bodies and hospitals and health systems, which then makes our jobs a lot more difficult. So for those populations who we really want to work with, and certainly from a leadership perspective, drive them in. You mentioned a while back that you've been trying to do work like that in terms of the mentorship and bringing people from various backgrounds in. Do you want to just touch on how you've been able to do that? Because I do feel that's very important based on what you've said already.
Yeah, and I think actually, it's probably at this point an aspect of what I do that's the most gratifying. So I see it as a real, privilege in a way and responsibility. I think though, Kunal, you touched on so many things that are so important. I think first of all of us who are in public health, healthcare, clinical research, I think it really starts with acknowledging. I think we have to acknowledge if you're going into a new environment, I think we have to still understand and recognize the level of distrust and the general still lack of, awareness and education. And so, I think that it's really hard to educate people. It's almost the proverbial, the chicken or the egg, where do you really start? And from a health standpoint and health disparity standpoint, where do you really start? I think to some of the points that you highlighted, you have to start with building some basis of relationship. And I believe that you have to start with that in launching on trust and building trust. Because once you do that, then being able to educate, right, and to be able to, expose people to new ideas or new opportunities, I think falls much more naturally. So I think it is always acknowledging, where research at times has exploited people, and especially where it has disproportionately disadvantaged people. So I think that that's an important, piece to this. On the internship, piece of this, we have within just my company, but not just my company. I think several large pharmaceutical companies are leaning into this now. There are associations, the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, ACRP, which is an international organization, really leaning into developing frameworks around entry points for internship. So I think that, that's an really important piece to this. From an internship standpoint, though, and, Kunal, you and I have had these discussions before, I think it's not just the program, but it is the basic, okay, how does internship best work? We cannot assume that, people are going to be able to automatically have transportation. A lot of the same issues that we have with patients and barriers to getting people in clinical trials. I think that's some of the attributes of decentralized clinical trials. Perhaps that's some of the attributes of the ability now to be remote, like we all are right here. We're not in a day and time, maybe where we're quite as constrained. But I think from a student and an internship standpoint, we have to be really intentional about who we're partnering with. What are the academic programs perhaps that are already in place? What are, some of the even allied health professional avenues, whether they're community colleges, four-year universities, graduate programs, and connecting in, and then ensuring, again, that, we understand what are the needs and the interest of the students and matching that experience accordingly. Somebody interested in pursuing a clinical, avenue. Okay, what type of clinical orientation through that internship. So just being really intentional, that not all internships are created equally.
No, and that is something really important to appreciate and understand. You touched on some key things which were really interesting and takes us nicely forward, which is that you mentioned in the previous, technology has a huge role to play in a lot of this, but you also mentioned decentralization, and everyone, some of the people attending here wouldn't know, I'd be very familiar with what decentralization is. So I was going to ask, could you touch on that a little bit, but then also how does that play a role into what you're trying to do? And also what Javara is trying to do in terms of the technologies that you're using to address some of the issues that we've discussed.
Yeah, so I'll provide some of the Jennifer commentary around decentralized trials. It's a controversial, if you're not familiar with it, you can Google, and there are companies that really describe themselves now as facilitating and enabling clinical trials. Companies like Medable, companies like Lightship, and a whole host of others. I actually believe that this new model around leveraging technology that would basically bring the clinical trial experience into the home of the patient, as opposed to other modes where patients don't have access. They're in geographic areas that are remote. They don't have transportation. They don't have the ability to make their way into a physical clinic. So, the idea around decentralized trials, again, was, okay, we're going to find ways to bring the trial to the patient. Some of these are very services oriented. Some of the decentralized trial companies or platforms, an important part of that could be home health nursing, could be investigational product gets shipped directly to you. There are technologies, electronic diaries, perhaps, that are collecting information. And so these companies are really kind of pulling this all together. And I think that the notion around the DCT concept was to address still the relatively low clinical trial participation that we have globally. And so for that, I think it's fantastic. I think anything and any type of business model, if there's an opportunity to tap into and bring clinical trials to a patient or to a patient population, that's fantastic. I believe where we're actually, moving towards is optionality. And the way that I think of decentralized clinical trials is that in future state, we are not presupposing that the only people who participate in decentralized clinical trials are those people who don't have transportation, for example, to a major metropolitan area where there's a robust clinical trial. But rather, we allow patients, we use technology, we use some of these different models to be able to allow the patient to craft what's exactly the experience that they are seeking. And is it completely remote? Is there some blend? In the work of Javara and in my own work, I would never presuppose that a patient would see that being required to go into a clinic would be something that they would rather not do. In my own experience, and I've been involved to date in probably over 8,000 clinical trials involving tens of thousands, probably 100,000 plus patient volunteers, it goes back to what I said. Every patient has a different motivation, right? We all have different things that we're looking for. And Kunal, believe it or not, you have a lot of patients, what they value is they value having that face-to-face in clinic time with you, right? Because you actually are giving them, through a clinical trial, probably even a bit of a premium healthcare delivery experience. They may not want, it might not be feasible for them to do that every week or even every month, but occasionally they actually value that more than what we're doing right now, by video. So I think decentralized clinical trials and technology in general is moving us into an era of patient preference.
And of course, that's really important. And with patient preference, I think what's interesting is that anyone who's working in public health or in health system strengthening and would say that that's what we want to focus on. You're absolutely right. But then we still have the challenges of, to get those clinics right, we still need leadership in the space of, well, what kind of doctor or healthcare professional are you accessing? So, and that comes down to public versus private systems. It comes to systems that provide family medicine as your point of care, which is obviously very encouraged in Europe and other continents. And so those challenges alone, when you're working with different health systems, which a lot of our audience is vast, and obviously influences workflow issues, and so as a leader in the space, what can we do about these workflow issues and these different systems? We touch on the technology bringing people closer together, yet at the same time, we have these systems operating very different.
Well, I think from a health system standpoint, I mean, understand again across this vast, complex ecosystem, technology has largely been innovated from kind of a top-down approach. So some of the earliest technology innovation, even during my time in the industry, has been around facilitating and expediting, for example, data collection, real-time data collection, but that has been driven by pharma. How can pharma get data faster? And then it just has kind of trickled down. I do think that we are moving in an era now where there's much more focus. There's much more investment coming now from the private sector, from the investment community. And I'm really encouraged by this, because I'm going to say it's almost more bottom up. And DCT is a good example of that, right? So it's really about the patient, more on the patient terms, building more flexibility and agility from a patient standpoint. So from a health system standpoint, I would say a lot of the work that we do, when I launched Javara 6.5 years ago, we spent precious little time and focus on having a prescribed set of technologies that we would be bringing to the table. Rather, we built the relationship and the partnership with healthcare systems. And we viewed our job as an organization to better understand the workflow of the health system, the clinicians, and how could we kind of gently, and in a coordinated way, integrate research with care, as opposed to the other way around. So I think, and from a health system standpoint, this is where some of the disconnect is, because there are tools and solutions that have been developed around research. For example, technologies around going in and looking across an electronic health record, and then taking a deeper dive into looking across 50 to 60 inclusion-exclusion criteria, right, using AI. And those products get labeled as clinical research programs, or solutions. Whereas on the health system standpoint, I mean, there are already tools oftentimes that are in use, not necessarily to match people to clinical trials, but health decision, and looking at kind of like health decision tools that are used in just the ongoing care and treatment. So I think from a health system standpoint, I would challenge anybody in the health system standpoint to think about what are those tools and what are the assets that you're using, and how can those be adapted to clinical trial optimization. And then where there are gaps, like, it's kind of like Lego pieces. Okay, then where are other tools that we don't have within the health system that perhaps can kind of augment the clinical trial portion of your business?
And that obviously leans towards us asking the question, like, is everything transparent when that happens? and I will ask you, and some may consider this a bit of a controversial question, is that what is the response you're getting? Is everyone buying into this? As if I was to be the next leader of the next clinical research organization, and I'm tapping the door of these health systems, speaking to, again, equivalents in those various groups of research or, clinical hospital groups, what has the response been? I mean, has it generally been positive? When it is negative, what have you been able to do to overcome that?
Well, I mean, Kunal, there are some threads here, hopefully thematic threads here that we keep resurfacing. And I think it is around, ensuring from a leadership standpoint that we are brand ambassadors of research and building trustworthiness. So that transparency, I think, has to be table stakes. So, in my experience and from a Javara standpoint, we partner with healthcare systems. So in a way, we're bringing the people, the process, the technology to really, create almost like a department of clinical research for a health system or a health organization. And it's 100% transparent. I mean, and, not to be crass, but I think that this is where it begins. Like, for the health system to be very clear and to have ongoing opportunities, even from a visualization standpoint, to understand the economics. So to understand exactly how pharma is paying, how we are getting paid, and how, in our case, our partner is a healthcare system, how those funds flow directly. So I think there's the economic piece of this in terms of the visibility and transparency that is an absolute must-have. I think the second piece to this, and I'm not weighting importance here, but I think the second piece to this is around the patient journey. I think the health system has to have, at any given time, complete transparency in terms of where that patient is in their clinical trial journey. And then a couple of things that we do to, I think, kind of build and add to that transparency with our healthcare partners. We also are providing feedback to our healthcare partner about patient experience. And we're also providing feedback in terms of the provider or the clinician experience. So we, by I think, most responsible public health or healthcare leaders are also collecting that experience data, and we are feeding it back. The pluses, the negatives, areas for improvement, the shout outs. I mean, it all basically is flowing back to the healthcare partner. And then let me add, I think the third piece to this is, how are we benchmarking against everyone else? Right? How do we really stack up, on a given clinical trial? How are we doing in terms of our performance, patient enrollment, retention, patient experience, all of those things? How are we benchmarking against our peers?
Yeah, well, benchmarking against our peers is always a challenge, especially as a leader, because is everyone going to be honest, in terms of their opinion of others, judging themselves, reflecting on themselves. But you mentioned feedback, and just to take a little step back before I go into my next question, everyone out there, please, we want to hear your feedback. We want to hear your questions. So I'm looking at the clock here. So this is a good opportunity to use the chat box to fire any questions you may have, and hopefully we can pose those if time permitting to Jennifer. So Jennifer, coming back to what you said with that interaction around health systems, we've talked about collaboration, teams, like we always said, teams, and teams, government, and non-profit buy-in, which comes back from the feedback there. But you mentioned a phrase to me that, and it was called reverse engineering, changing that process. Is that what it is, or what else could it be if we're thinking about possible solutions to the challenges that we've touched on in this space?
Yeah, I think it changes, Kunal. I think it completely changes the relationship and the spirit of the partnership. And I'll give you kind of two views on this. So when we partner with healthcare systems, I think the starting point is to address what are the most pressing unmet patient needs that organization is trying to address. Now, the unmet needs could be truly that in terms of rare disease, right? There are no available, or there are very limited, commercially available options. So research can become a gateway. Sometimes the unmet needs have to do with just the unsustainability in terms of the cost of that particular patient population. So, unfortunately, most of the world, not all of the world, parts of the world have done far better, certainly than the United States, as an example. But if you look at the cost of care associated with diabetes, for example, and all the comorbidities that come with that, it's a very expensive patient population, generally speaking. So, those would be a couple of examples about how, from a health system standpoint, okay, let's have the first conversation and the second and the third, and to continue to have that dialogue about, okay, what are the unmet needs of your patient population? And then the other aspect to that is that, with pharma, large pharma, mid-size, small biotech, getting a really good handle on that, again, very complex landscape, 8,000 plus, different innovative companies that are bringing forth these, new treatments, using data sources to understand what's in that overarching pipeline. So 20,000 plus compounds and devices, and then it becomes like a match.com. So now your orientation on this reverse engineering is not that you're showing up to Pfizer and saying, hey, Pfizer, we're here, we're in business, what do you have for us? Instead, we have the opportunity to go to Pfizer and we can say, across these patient populations that we are responsible for and representing clinical trial access, we have 50,000 people who have these unmet needs in this very specific type of, macular degeneration, for example, patient population. So that, Kunal, I think, is where like the reverse engineering is, but I believe that is where you really get to the point of true patient-centeredness. And from a health system standpoint, right, and a population health standpoint, now you are, you have the responsibility / opportunity of building portfolios of studies to address that wider spread population, and understanding that actually the larger the portfolio, they're not competitive trials. They actually become very complementary trials. Because what the nuances of these various protocols, what will include one very specific patient population with macular degeneration might very well be included in another program.
Okay, so that hints towards, trying to deal with best practice, trying to ensure that if there are those differences between progress, it's like, if we're going to deal with, let's say, macular degeneration, I can tell you from my experience, if you're thinking about low middle income countries, it's a whole different landscape. It's a whole different environment. Trying to deal with that, and even diabetes, which, as you've rightly pointed out, is incredibly expensive. Dealing with these in these geographies, and particularly some of the geographies that our students attending today are in, can be a real challenge, especially from a public health perspective. So if we're thinking about success stories and best practice, and you mentioned cost, which also plays a role, is that it's, how do we understand, how do we convince people, and even ourselves, let's be honest, what is the value proposition behind all of this in terms of everything that we've touched on so far? Because obviously that is part of the conversation that's going to happen, whether you're a current leader of an organization or an emerging leader, or one that wants to be. You are going to be constantly asked, as I'm sure you have, is like, well, what is the value proposition to all of this? How's it going to benefit us, apart from what we've already discussed from a public health perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think from lessons learned, I can tell you one thing that I underestimated greatly with launching this company, 6+ years ago, was probably a bit more ambitious around trying to be all things to all people and to all healthcare organizations. So I think, one insight that I would offer would be around focus. So if you are a health system or you're a professional, you're a leader, and you're kind of thinking about, clinical research, direct contributor, leading, building a program, whatever it might be, I would really recommend that you focus in, at least to begin with, on a more narrowly defined starting point. So whether that would be oncology or whether that would be neurology or CNS, because around complexity and workflow, it gets to that as well, and the patient journey. There are, the patient journey for one patient population can be very different. The providers within those areas work differently. The technologies, right? The ancillary services, setting up and building a really robust ophthalmology program would be very, very different than that of a neurology program. I mean, just like the practice of medicine, you still carry all those, I think, complexities and challenges. So I would say, kind of focus around, building that out, and not thinking that you're just going to launch a program or a partnership that is too broad, because it will be very difficult to have best practices established. Again, getting back to that complexity topic that we've already covered.
Wow. Okay. So if I was to pull that all together, and if someone was to come to me today and say, I want to be what you're doing, I want to be where you are in 6 years or maybe less, what do I need to do? And we've obviously heard what you've been able to achieve, what access you had in terms of mentorship and leadership, but to address those very pertinent points that you've made just there, how do I get there? I'm just a postgraduate student. What do I need to do?
Well, I would say if anybody, again, lessons learned, I cannot imagine now, and I have a better appreciation for it today than I ever had before. I cannot imagine having done this by myself. And I did not do this by myself. I had a couple of people that I had worked with for many years, had great trust and respect for. That was an advantage. I had an early group of advisors. Those advisors eventually transitioned into my early board, members. So I would absolutely say, if you're thinking about this, do not be thinking about this on your own. Find that group of people around you. You need, more than likely, you're going to need financing for this. You are going to need, a business plan, and you're going to need to be really clear in terms of what it is that you are trying to solve. One of the very first things that I did 6.5 years ago that has withstood the test of time, I actually developed a manifesto. So, everybody talks about mission, vision, and values. We actually created a manifesto, and there are 4 pillars to that manifesto. And believe it or not, I mean, that continues to be the North Star and the guiding light. At times when I had to raise capital a couple of years ago, I went back to that document. It was very grounding in terms of what it was that I was really committed to do and what it was that I was trying to solve. And believe it or not, just for example, going back to that document, it made it very clear in terms of investors that fit and would support that manifesto, and investors out there that would not support the work and the commitment of that manifesto. So I would offer that up. And then I would say too, and this was said to me many times before, and trust me when I say this, no matter what that idea is, and if you think, okay, this is something that I can do in 1 year and it's going to take $10, in my experience, put a multiplier on that of probably 10. It will take 10 times as long. It will be 10 times as costly, perhaps. But I think it also stands to be even more than 10 times rewarding. So I didn't say that to encourage or to discourage anybody. I actually said that to be very encouraging.
Okay, so that leads me very nice to some questions that I've been able to review, and hopefully I'll be able to get through some of these with you, Jennifer, time permitting. You did mention something, and please tell me straight away if you're not. I said, are we allowed to know what those 4 pillars are in your manifesto?
Absolutely. So recognizing that clinical research is an extension of public health, recognizing that the ecosystem is in need of change, recognizing that the cost of that change, there is an element of time. So some things money cannot buy, and some of it is just time in terms of establishing best practices, finding right partnerships, and understanding that if we really keep to that, that we in fact recognize that we are contributors to global health.
Oh, fantastic. Now, looking at some of these questions, I'm going to try and round them up into 1 or 2 if I can. So some of them are career focused, understandably. And so, Jeff, what advice would you give someone considering a career transition from public health into clinical research? And that also leads into the next part, which is that if it was to be an internship, where do I find one? How do I go about doing it? And then, yeah, I'll have a couple more after that, but let's stick with those for now.
Okay.
That's a common question we're getting is about how to move into the field, how to either get a different role or an internship. And what organizations are in what country. So we're answering some of those directly, but I think that career piece, Jennifer, if you could shine a light on that, would be massively appreciated by the audience.
Well, just right off the top, I mean, I can tell you, I know, for example, Medtronic, companies like Medtronic, Amgen, Pfizer, Merck have robust internship programs. You know, of course, I'm available. I'd be happy to facilitate, any additional resources in that way. But I think for the audience, I think you have to think about the experience with a large pharma company from an internship standpoint is probably not going to put you right alongside a patient and a clinician and an investigator. So just understanding that, it gives you a different perspective, which I think is fantastic. I think from a patient standpoint and a clinician standpoint, definitely an internship on the healthcare side of things, because the pharma companies are not going to be in a position to facilitate more the clinical experience.
That's great. And one that's quite specific, and if you can, what has been your greatest challenge? I know we touched on it at the beginning of our conversation today, but if you were to pick one, what would you say that was?
I'm going to say myself. At times, self-doubt. That term, it gets overly used, I think, but it's true. Imposter syndrome, where you sometimes just have self-doubt. And I will say this, at a point in time, when if part of your story is achieving some level of mastery in whatever that is, In my case, I would say my mastery has been much, much more focused on the patient journey, on the patient and the provider journey in terms of, clinical research as part of that continuum of care. I think that when you have committed to that, at a certain point in time, you can't always have so much self-doubt about what it is that you've done. So I think self-doubt at times has been my greatest challenge. Can I offer a second one?
Go on, please.
Okay. I think a second one is that if you are moving into an area that's new and, you are pioneering in terms of anything, you're inventing, you want to launch a business. I think that you have to be prepared at times to feel very lonely. Because sometimes, right, you're kind of showing up, you're taking an idea that perhaps has not really been launched, and you have to have patience, and you have to continue to show up, and you have to continue, right? You have to have, I think, a lot of resilience in that, because you're not always, doors are not always opening where it's established that, what you're saying is in fact, has been established.
No, and I think that generally leads to a question that just popped up: is that how can you tell the difference between imposter syndrome or self-doubt, and generally not having the necessary skills and qualities for something? I think that's quite pertinent to and relevant to what you've just said. I think we do have a big question, which I don't think we have the time to answer, which is, what about AI and how is it being used to improve clinical research? I would think we'll have to have another session on that, and redirect you to our previous masterclass, which touched on AI and in its role in healthcare. But Jennifer, very briefly, what has been your experience in relation to AI and its use in your space, considering it's such a hot topic right now?
Well, we're seeing the impact of it, obviously in real time. But, AI is not something that is necessarily being done for us. We are an equal contributor to AI. So the tools that we are using actually become more powerful with the more data and the more use, that we are applying. So my experience with AI, it is that you also are an active participant and contributor to the AI journey. So this is not that, and that was that was kind of an underestimation on my part when we brought in our first really AI tool. We viewed that to be something that was going to totally automate patient enrollment, and that could not be the furthest from the truth. It's really the workflow to optimize the AI and just the ongoing and importance in terms of the buildup of additional data.
Okay, great. Jim, I'm looking at the time here. I think
we are on the hour. What a fascinating discussion. What an absolutely fascinating discussion. I think the themes that have come out, both from a professional development and from an industry perspective, are fascinating. That, Jennifer, those comments around having a community around you, having that ecosystem around you, having the very practical things taught out, but also not being afraid to innovate, because that's where the growth comes from. And the one of the things that I took from it really was that the cooperation, the communication, the workflows between different areas of the health systems, that's where we can get better, more efficient, more patient focused. As Kunal said, the technological part, the AI, the wearables and all of that, we could easily spend another hour on that. And I think the questions that are coming in on the chat are, it's clearly, the audience that we have tonight is clearly looking to see, how can I get more involved in this? How can I, either as a clinician or as a non-clinical healthcare professional, move into this space? And that's, it shows a huge level of interest. So the insight has been absolutely fascinating. And Kunal, great moderation and asking of the questions. we're going to finish on one final piece tonight. Many of the people in this call are connected to IHEAD through interest in particular program areas, be that clinical research, be that public health or healthcare leadership. And I'm going to launch a poll that we'll leave open for a couple of minutes. And really what this is asking is, are there programs within the portfolio that IHEAD has that you would be interested in finding out more about? The portfolio covers some of the most in-demand and relevant subject areas, both to clinical professionals and to non-clinical professionals working in a healthcare environment. The programs are offered by the University of Warwick, which is a top 10 UK university, top 60 worldwide, and the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland, which are one of the oldest and most prestigious medical education institutions globally. They're all wholly online programs. They're all part-time. They are, by and large, interprofessional, which we are huge advocates of as well. So if people would like to hear about any of these programs, if you just fill in the poll, one of our education advisors would be really happy to reach out and give you information on them. But if I can finish, Jennifer, by asking actually, what in moving into this space, what degree of professional qualifications do you think are necessary? Is it necessary to have research, leadership, public health, any of these, or can you simply immerse yourself, learn by doing, get mentorship? What's your experience on people actually studying in the area?
Well, listen, I think, Dermot, I think there is plenty of opportunity. I think you have to know yourself. So I think that there's that pathway where you immerse your kind of increasing knowledge base in terms of very much a generalist, really coming to understand the broader ecosystem and really be able to understand, again, kind of like how all the pieces and parts, how the team comes together. But I think that if you are that person, that specialization and mastery is important. I mean, there are so many deep career opportunities to be a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
And we need both. I mean, I think from an ecosystem standpoint, we need both. So I think just by evidence, I didn't see your program offerings until just now. I mean, I think it's a great example of where I think you've got to take your personal orientation and either, move towards that high degree of specialization or the generalist approach.
Yeah. And again, some of the questions that we've been asked are, if someone's in dentistry, how do they get more involved in this? If they're a physician, how do they get more involved in this? And it is, of course, really possible to get involved in research from within your clinical setting and then transfer or grow into a role that's formally a part research, part patient-facing role. And those transitions happen quite frequently within careers where people move from a purely clinical role into something that's a hybrid of either education or research or administration, etc. So I think you're right. And I think both those perspectives are needed, where it is the generalist or I'm going to really get into a specialist area here. The other, I suppose the other question to finish on that's been coming through is the types of organizations that people should approach if they are interested in this. And I'd welcome your view on whether it is purely the pharmas or the clinical research organizations, the ICONs, the SGSs, etc., or whether they should actually, and there's quite a few from Qatar, for example, on the call, whether they should look to the clinical research that's run out of, the main health systems within their country. What would your sense be?
I mean, again, I think it depends on where you are drawn towards. I think from a regional standpoint and from a health system standpoint, I think there are those opportunities, across the globe. That's going to be a different experience, though. It's going to be, directly, more than likely, you're going to be part of facilitating the patient journey. So the health system and, most large health systems do have some clinical research offering. They don't always promote it, but
Yeah.
it's usually there. It's unfortunate. Sometimes it gets hidden in the background, but it's usually there. So I think upon investigation, you would be pleasantly surprised at how many of those offerings probably are within reach of this entire audience. I have to say, I think that the CRO, the Icons of the world, the IQVIAs, Par Excel, those are great organizations if you are interested in that generalist. Within a couple of years period of time, you more than likely will get exposed to so many different pharma companies. You have an opportunity to get exposed in projects across a broader offering of therapeutic areas, for example. So those represent, if you're more into that generalist, that's a really good pathway.
Yeah, because you'll get that breadth. I think you're right, though. I think, and I know some of the Middle Eastern countries where actually they have quite good clinical research going on within their main health systems. But you're right, it's not loudly publicized. So there are, I would say to the people that have asked us from the DHA or from Hamad, etc., that are on the call, it definitely exists. So go explore. And I think, as Jennifer said, you might be surprised at how close those opportunities are to you. But Jennifer, I'm really conscious of time and of yours and of the participants. But we could keep talking for another hour on this, no problem. But thank you so much for your contribution this evening, and to you, Kunal. It's been an absolutely fascinating and enlightening discussion, and the recording will be available for everyone afterwards, so we will send you the recording tomorrow. And thank you again so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you so much. Best of luck to everybody on your journey.
Thanks so much, Jennifer.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kunal.